What's up, guys? I hope you're having an absolutely wonderful day. Today's episode is a super fun conversation with one of our clients at Fit for Life Academy, AJ Gracely. He's a super successful professional in the finance space. He's really busy, works between 50 to 60 hours a week. He's married. His anniversary is actually tomorrow, but if you're listening to this, it was probably like a week and a half ago now. He's been married for about 19 years. He has three wonderful kids. Family, business, and fitness are an absolute priority for him. We've been working with him for about 2.5, 3 years now, so he's one of our long-term clients. And Anthony's story is a little bit unique, or I'm not going to say his story is unique, but his struggles are unique because most of the clients that we work with and some of these interviews that we've been doing over the past couple of weeks are with a lot of clients who are just getting started in their health and fitness journey. But AJ had actually been into health and fitness for quite some time. He had been training for years. He had been focusing on his diet and improving his body composition for quite some time. And he reached out for coaching because he felt like he had hit a wall and he wasn't seeing the results that he would have expected from the amount of effort that he was putting in. So we talk about all of that in the episode. He shares his particular journey, his challenges, his struggles, some of the things that have really helped him see better progress from a nutritional perspective, from a training perspective. We went pretty in the weeds when we started talking about training because I love talking about training, and he does as well. So it was a fun time talking about training. And then even towards the end of the episode, we talked about how he's able to manage health and fitness given that he has a full-time career, he has a family, he's married, because oftentimes we tend to blame our family, our careers, our lifestyle as to why we can't really prioritize health and fitness. So that was a fun conversation at the end as well. We talked about priorities, sacrifice, boundaries, all of that good stuff. So with that said, I hope you enjoy the episode. Let's go ahead and get right into it. What's up, Anthony? How are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me today.
No, thank you for taking time to be here. Do you mind starting off just by sharing a little bit about who you are, what you do, so people get to know you a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So my name is AJ Gracely. I'm a finance professional living in Houston, Texas. I'm a father of three. So my kids are 13, 10, and 8. I've been married for almost 19 years. So it'll be 19 years tomorrow. And then, yeah, as a busy finance professional, I work about 50 to 60 hours a week in the investment industry.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And happy anniversary. I hope you
Oh,
guys have a
thank you.
wonderful time tomorrow. Dude, I didn't know you were in Texas. I was actually just there for the first time about 3 weeks ago. It was a great time. I was in Austin. Of course, I had to have some barbecue. I probably ate a little bit too much, paid for it the next day, but it was a good time.
But it's worthwhile. The barbecue here is fantastic, and in Austin in particular, Central Texas is well known for its barbecue.
Yeah. We went to Terry Black's. Of course, we waited for an hour in line. Man, I've always seen a lot of the barbecue spots on TV, but it's way better in person, obviously.
Yeah. Oh man, it's Terry Black's is one of my favorite spots, and yeah, Austin has some phenomenal barbecue restaurants, so you really can't go wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I could talk about food forever. But let's make this about you. So, Anthony, you and I were chatting. Your story's a little bit unique because you are one of the clients that has been working with us and with Bernardo specifically for a really long time. We only really have a handful of clients who have been with us for about 2.5, 3 years, which you have been with us for that long. Um, Take us back before you started coaching with us or before you started coaching with Bernardo specifically. Where were you? What were your challenges? And why did you decide to reach out for coaching in the first place?
Yeah, so I've been weight training for pretty much my whole adult life. I started in high school, and then as I think every middle-aged person does at some point, had a bout of an experience with endurance exercise. So I spent a little bit of time running and doing triathlon. And what happened to me was my mid 30s, my body started breaking down.
Mm,
And I went to a physical therapist and he said, you're not really doing any weight training, which I had been doing in my youth. He said, you really need to incorporate that into your exercise regimen. And so I started incorporating some weight training. And then I realized I just really loved lifting weights. And so I decided, I wanted to move away from the endurance exercise and really focus on what were my long-term health goals. And those long-term health goals were to build a little bit of muscle and really just to keep my body healthy and fit so that I could live a long, healthy life. And so I started reading and programming my own exercises. And one of the things that I realized in doing that was I started to put on a little bit of size, but I was also overtraining or undertraining. And so I wasn't getting what I wanted to out of the weight room. And I felt like I was putting in a lot of effort, but I wasn't seeing the results. And so I started looking around for options. And I decided, I'm going to try a trainer at the gym. It's close. It's right there. And I started there, and the weight side or the weight training side was fine, but there was no synchronization with the diet side. And so I felt like I still wasn't getting the results that I was hoping to get. And so I started looking around for other options. And that's when I went to another online coach. And again, I felt like there just wasn't the holistic relationship that I was looking for. So, I definitely got the I definitely got the weight training component of it, but there was a little bit of synchronization with the diet. And I was starting to make some progress on that and starting to get the gains that I wanted to get. But I still felt like for the effort that I was putting in, the results that I were extracting was just not what I was hoping for. So I started again searching around for options, and that's when I found Coach Bernardo. And I would say the major difference was he at first sought to understand what my goals were.
Mm.
So instead of just saying, hey, I'm going to program this and like let's do 1,800 calorie diet or whatever the number is, he said, okay, well, what are you trying to accomplish? Not in the next 6 months, but for the next 6 years.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, here's how I'm feeling. Here's what I want to do. What is the long term plan for that? And he said, okay, let's program your weight training. Let's program your diet around that. And then in doing these weekly check-ins, what he really helped me do was holistically synchronize the diet and the exercise component of it. And that was the part of my training that I really struggled with the most. So once I developed that partnership with Bernardo and he really understood my goals and started to program my training, we really started to build into a mezzo and to build into my goals. And I say we because it's been a really strong partnership between me and him. It's been established over that time period through these weekly check-ins where he's really come to understand me and what drives and motivates me. And, one of the things that I've struggled with, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later, is overtraining.
Mhm.
And so he's helped me with that, making sure I'm staying within the appropriate rep ranges so I can complete the mezzo, but then also pairing that on the diet side to making sure I'm getting the most out of my effort in the gym. So finding Coach Bernardo has been a really enlightening experience for me because since I've started, I've really seen the results, not just from the gym, but from the diet side and the whole mentality around training, which is unique for me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, a ton of stuff here that I want to go into. I wanted to highlight the sentence that you said about coaching being a collaborative relationship, right? Because I think that's so, so important to have, especially when you work with, um, I think in order to have a good coaching relationship, it needs to be collaborative, essentially, right? I've talked to a lot of people who have inquired to work with us and they've had prior experiences working with other coaches. And it's a very top-down approach of like, I tell you to do this, you do it. If you can't do it, you're just being lazy and unmotivated and you need to try harder. And there might be an inkling of truth to that with some people, right? But in general, it's just lack of expertise, lack of compassion, lack of being open to having conversations and seeing where the client wants to go and what they're struggling with. So with that said, I want to tackle the I want to talk about the main challenges that you were experiencing prior to getting started with coaching and where you were in that time point, specifically from a training perspective and then from a nutritional perspective as well. Because I did have a conversation with Bernardo before we hopped on here, and he said that your challenges for each of those were slightly unique, right? Where on the training side, you mentioned you have been training for a long time. You enjoy training, you like lifting weights. And because of that, maybe you were training a little too hard, technique would kind of break down, you were experiencing some nagging pains and injuries. Talk me through that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great observation on Bernardo's part, and it really does highlight the partnership that he and I have. And that was something he pointed out early on, because my initial feedback to him in the very first week that we were together was, "Hey, this is not enough volume," and that was back to our very first check-in. That's what I said, and he was like, just trust the process." Um, because when we had that initial meeting, that's what I had communicated that to him. I said, look, the frustrating thing is I'll get 4 weeks into a meso and my shoulder will hurt, or my knee will hurt, or, my
Yeah.
hip will hurt. I'll have to back off. And he said, well, maybe you're overtraining. And, I just don't think so. And so when he programmed that first meso and I'm in that first week, it's like, oh man, I don't know. Like I have a lot of intensity in the gym and I just want more, I want more volume, and this is not enough for me. And I don't see how this is going to get me where I want to go, which was to put on the muscle. And, he did say, yeah, look, just trust the process. And, I made it through that first meso to that week 7, where we're going towards 0 reps in reserve with no injury. And I felt fatigued, but not like I had a nagging pain in my shoulder, a nagging pain in my knee that was going to prevent me from accomplishing the goal. And the other thing I realized, in addition to actually making it to the end of the training cycle, was that I could still push really hard in that last week and really extract the gains that I was hoping to get. And so by having that feedback from Bernardo throughout, where he was looking at the videos saying, hey, you're pushing a little bit too close to failure here. We want to be more in the range, so dial back. For me, that was really powerful, because I equated max effort in the gym with the gains that I was hoping to get.
Yeah.
And I needed somebody to come in and say, it's okay for you to stay within the rep range. And matter of fact, it's not only okay, you have to do it, because if you don't do it, we're not going to achieve your objective. And so, Bernardo understood the mentality I had. He understood that I really like to push. And by helping me with my own mentality and saying, it's not about pushing one day, it's about pushing through the 8 or 9 weeks to achieve your objectives. That's what we're trying to do. And then seeing that result from the entire meso was a really strong experience that I had, because it was a huge proof point. Before I didn't have that proof point, because I never really made it. I went in and just push and push. And, you read the stuff online. It's like, oh, each week you have to be adding weight. And but- and so that was my mentality though. Like, oh, if I'm not adding weight, I'm not going to get any bigger. And that was not accurate. And Bernardo helped reshape that. So that was a really powerful partnership.
Yeah. And there's such an interesting relationship between variables like volume and intensity, right? It's like, hey, intensity is obviously important. And in a vacuum, like higher intensity does result in more growth per unit of volume, right? But the truth is that intensity impacts how much volume you can do.
Yeah.
And we know that volume is also really important. So it's really about finding a sweet spot where you could train with decent volume and decent intensity, be able to scale that throughout a mesocycle, right? And everybody's a little bit different too, AJ, because um, if you the issue that you were encountering is not super unique by any means. Like the issue with having that mindset of pushing as hard as possible is that in theory it's not bad, but in practice, it's going to result in a lot of nagging pain, which then prevents you from actually training hard, which prevents you from being consistent long term, which is the most important factor, right? Uh,
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. And if I can't wake up and train the next day because I overdid it on day 2, then I'm not doing myself the service that I want longer
yeah.
term.
Now, let me ask you this, because I feel like one of the things that people struggle with here is um, backing off in terms of intensity, right? Of like not pushing near failure. I feel like maybe I'm not pushing hard enough. And it's really hard to know where that sweet spot is. Because you also, I mean, like, I'm sure you would acknowledge that just because you're not training to failure does not mean that it's easy. It's still difficult, right? So how were you able to find that sweet spot over time of like really knowing what 2 or 3 reps in reserve feels like?
Yeah, I think it was in. in the first couple of mesos that I did with Bernardo, there was a lot of back and forth on, him watching the video, giving critique to my
Mhm.
form, feedback, and then, him helping me understand what I was feeling. And so, in the video, when my form was breaking down, him giving the feedback saying, hey, you're at mechanical failure there.
Yep.
And, you need to be dialing back. And that's actually, you think you're at one, but you're actually at zero or failure. So you should be doing one less rep or two less reps. And so there was a lot of back and forth between Bernardo and me. And then as we built that over the course of the last couple of years, now I kind of have a good sense of when my form is starting to break down. And even now, like I'll go back and watch the videos myself before he watches them and gives the feedback. And I can say, okay, like I can see on that eighth rep or ninth rep when I'm supposed to be getting 10 that I'm speeding up the rep instead of, the concentric phase when I should be at, 3 seconds or whatever it is. I'm not doing what I should be doing. You can also feel the fatigue building
Yes.
too. So, and, and it kind of over time you realize, hey, I know that I've got one or two left. And then having him affirm that it just builds that mental model that you have about what you can and can't do.
Yeah, it's just developing self-awareness in training, right? Which takes a long time. Like it's a difficult skill to develop. It's not just because we get this question often, and even just talking to people on social media, they're like, well, how do I know if I have 2 reps left? It's like, you're not going to get it next week, right? You need to really try, look at the video, get feedback, maybe take a set to failure to see if you were actually right. And over time, you really develop that skill. I'm happy you brought up the concept of technical failure versus absolute failure, right? Because they're two very, very different things. And the truth is that, like, there's probably nothing wrong if you train pretty close to technical failure the majority of the time. The thing is, you could always get another 3, 4, 5 reps if you limit the range of motion. If technique breaks down, you start moving a little bit faster, you don't pause, you don't go as deep, right? So, talk to me about how much work you had to do on the technique side of things and range of motion side of things to really optimize training for hypertrophy specifically.
Yeah, I mean, there was a fair amount of work on that side because I would get when I originally started, I was not doing full range of motion stuff, and
Mhm.
there was yeah, I
It's
was in a
hard.
gym. There's a lot of people around. There's a little bit of cheating, so you can lift a little bit more weight. Just because I'm competitive and there are people around, and you want to be lifting the 30s instead of the 25s. And then through that feedback process, and Bernardo was saying, you're not getting enough extension, you're not going slowly enough on through your phases. You're bouncing the bar off your chest, so you're cheating. Those sorts of things. And so it it took a period of about 6 months in total for me to get down the reps in reserve, but then also the way the exercises should be done. And even now, there are certain exercises that he programs for me where at the beginning of a meso, he's giving me a lot of feedback. Like, hey, you're not that's not exactly the way that you're supposed to do it. And he demonstrates. And so then, the next week I get the opportunity to go in and do it the way that he has prescribed. And hopefully I get that part right. So that I can, maintain the exercise and do it the right way and really achieve the goal, which for me is building muscle. So it is a process, and it does take some time. And even 2.5 years in, I'm still learning.
Yeah.
And that's the part that I really enjoy about it. And then the other part, and this is a little bit of a deviation that I like about the training with RIR is or reps in reserve is, there are some days where I go into the gym and I'm feeling a little bit more fatigued. And so if I'm training 2 reps in reserve and last week I got 10 and this week, I can only get 9 because it was 2 last week and it's 2 reps in reserve this
Mhm.
week. Yeah. It helps with that concept of preservation throughout the meso that we talked about earlier, as opposed to, fatiguing too early. And so I like that concept of training, and it does take a period of time though to get used to how that feels, and also to get used to the exercises and the ranges of motion and the speeds, and because as I mentioned before, I was just the heavier the weight gets, tends to be the worse your form because you want to
Yeah.
just lift the weight. And when I was stuck in that mentality earlier, where every week I was trying to go up, that form starts to change really quickly in the earlier part of the exercise, and then you're recruiting muscle that you're not intending to use on that particular exercise. So it's kind of counterproductive.
Yeah. Yeah, man, it's a bit of a hit to your ego, right? But it's like, all right, we got to drop the weight pretty substantially to improve technique here, to improve range of motion. Like, it's probably, and I would say it's more common in guys than girls, cheating on technique, right? Like using heavier weight, moving weight around quickly. Um, you could probably, I mean, you've realized this, even if you just move weight quicker, right? Don't really control the eccentric, you could probably typically add 10, 15, 20% to the bar. On
Mhm.
something like a bench press, how much more difficult is it to lower the weight and take 2 or 3 seconds and then pause it in that stretch position where it's super difficult before
Oh,
contracting?
man.
Not only is it more difficult, it just requires so much more focus as well, right? It requires so much more intense. So it is mentally draining to an extent as well. And it's so much easier to add another 25 on each side and just drop it on your chest, let your butt come a mile off the bench, and then just push it back up. But it's just not as effective.
Yeah. Well, and I will say, the thing that you just mentioned there that really resonated with me was the mental focus that I
Mhm.
have during these exercises versus what I had before. Because, before I was the guy who was listening to a podcast or whatever while I was lifting weights. And now there's no podcast because I'm not,
You
I
can't pay attention.
wouldn't hear anything
Yeah.
because I'm focused on the exercise the entire time.
Yep.
And one tangible example of this. So when I first started with Bernardo, one of the exercises that I was doing that I really loved is the Romania deadlift.
Hmm.
And so I was doing about 285. I was doing 3 sets, 10 reps at 285. And he said, look, you need to work on your form. And so let's back off to 225. And I remember writing him back like 225, like, come on, man, that's, and he was like, just do it and work exactly on the cues that I give to you. And let's just stay on this for a couple of weeks. And so there were about 3 weeks where I was down at 225, just working on the cues that he gave me for those 3 weeks. And then he said, okay, let's go up 10 pounds. Let's go up 10 pounds. Let's go up 10 pounds. And by the end of 6 weeks, I was right back at 285, but I was with much, much better form. And it was also much harder.
Yeah. Yeah. And you probably actually felt your hamstrings working specifically versus
Yeah.
just like, oh, this is really hard, but I don't feel it specifically in the hamstrings.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so the RDL is one. What were some of the big exercises that you were struggling with, or maybe you didn't even know you were struggling with, but had to put the most work into?
I think so. The RDL was definitely one.
Hmm.
The other one was just the leg press. And that was one where, yeah, again, egotistically loading up weight and going about 90 degrees and then pushing back up. And that was one where Bernardo said, hey, like I, at the time I was doing about 450, 470 on that. And he said, we're going to 380.
Yeah.
it, and again, I was like, no, man, my legs are really strong. And he said, just let's try to get a fuller, deeper range of motion. And he helped me adjust the backrest down a little bit to get some more activation of the quads. And yeah, I went down to 380 with full range of motion, and I was like, man, this is really hard.
Yeah. You
Uh,
know, sorry, go ahead. You were going to say
no,
something.
but so in working through that, again, I was able to increase weight over the course of, it was a little bit longer time frame, probably about 3 to 4 months to get back to where I
Hmm.
was. But again, with much better form and with much fuller range of motion.
Yeah, and when you get back up to like, you actually feel more confident in the way you can control the weight too. I've realized that training with slow eccentrics, pausing in the stretch position, full range of motion allows you to like maximally fatigue the muscle you're trying to target and doesn't make you feel as systemically fatigued, right? Like when you do a leg press like way down, maybe to 90 degrees, and you kind of like just let the weight slam down and then you press it up. You could use, the thing is, with that technique, you can use so much weight that it's so like draining to your entire body, right?
Mhm.
Like to your entire nervous system, to where like you really need to work yourself up emotionally to be able to do something like that. Anytime I see somebody put 6, 7, 8 plates on a leg press, without seeing what they're doing, I know they're going to do it incorrectly because that is, unless they're like a massive bodybuilder, because that is
Yeah.
so heavy. And most dudes at the gym put 6 plates on the leg press, right? Like it's pretty common. And then you'll realize when you start doing it correctly, 3 plates, 4 plates is really challenging to do correctly. Um, I wanted to touch on the concept of focus again that you brought up a second ago, because one of the things that bothers me most that I see at the gym when it comes to personal trainers is that they're like talking to their clients in between reps and sets, right? It's like the client is literally doing an exercise and they're talking to their client, and the client's like responding. That just like, you're not working hard enough, first and foremost. You're not focused. You're not really going to improve. And I bring this up because I don't know, I'm sure some of the people listening might be working with personal trainers and they might have this experience. And it's just not helpful in any way, man. Would you be able to train with somebody talking to you?
No, and matter of fact, so the other day I wrote a text message to a guy after the gym because he, it's a gym, it's kind of a social environment,
Hmm.
and he walked up to me while I was in the middle of a lift and started talking, and I did not respond to him because I could not respond to him.
Yeah.
And so I texted him afterwards to say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude to you, but when I'm lifting, I can't chit chat, man." Because all of my focus is on that rep or that set. And if it's not there, I'm not going to achieve the objective that I want. And so, yeah, you have to bring that focus and intensity to every rep and every set that you're doing. And there's no room for chit chat. Like there's no room for listening to a podcast even because my brain is completely focused on that particular exercise.
Yeah. No, I love it. And it shows that you've really developed the skills and mindset that are important for really getting results out of your lifting. Because as you mentioned, AJ, like you've been training for a while, you were seeing some results in strength improvements prior, but not to the degree that you would have expected given the effort that you were putting in. A lot of people feel that way. A lot of people like train pretty regularly and they don't really see improvements in strength. They don't see much improvements in muscle mass. So, if to recap this training section that we're talking about here, what would be like the 3 most actionable tips or biggest lessons that you've learned so far in your training career that really um, exponentially increased your progress in the gym?
Yeah, I would say the first is to not mistake intensity of effort for actually the intensity required to extract results. There's intensity that you can put in, but then there's intelligent intensity. And it's really that second piece, that intelligent intensity that you need. The second is I didn't think I had much to gain on the training side, to be honest, when I
Hmm.
started working with Bernardo, because I was like, okay, I really just need somebody to program my workouts because I work a lot and I can't do it on my own. Um, so I just want somebody to do it, but I can't really extract that much value. There's a lot of value you can extract from having a coach who will help you manage your intensity, but will also help you manage your technique, your weight, will push you a little bit to increase when he or she thinks you need to increase, and will back you off when you don't. So you can really benefit from that coaching aspect that Bernardo brought to the table for me. And then I think the third is, just to not be afraid to go backwards, to go
Hmm.
forwards. And that was the thing that I think in the back of my mind, really, I knew that I wasn't doing the workouts with the right technique, or I was maybe using a little bit too much weight, but I didn't give myself the grace to say, you know what, back off. You need to train in a different way, and then you can lift more. Let's get the technique down. And Bernardo gave me that space to be able to do that and say, hey, let's take a couple of steps back because you yourself have told me that this is about the long term, not about the tomorrow in the gym. And then if I could just say one more thing, yeah, I know you said three, and those are
It's
three.
fine.
But this is the fourth thing. That the fourth is that again, I didn't think I had a lot to benefit from the mentality around training because I have an
Mm,
intense personality and I'm competitive, and I was like, oh, I want to get in the gym and just train really hard.
mhm.
But the coaching aspect really helped me hone my focus. So I was intense before, but now the focus that I have is completely different than what I had before. And so I think that is the benefit of having that coach.
Yeah, I love those. Those are really great points. And I love bringing up the concept of focus and mindset because it's one thing that people like don't really think about, right? I feel like a lot of people also go into the gym with the mindset of like, oh, I just want to get this workout done and go home. And if you have that mindset, you're inherently not putting in the degree of effort that's necessary to really extract results from training, right? And I want to explicitly bring up this point because I feel like it's obvious based off what we're talking about, but I feel like a lot of people might be listening and still be hesitant to think like, man, maybe I'm not training correctly. Maybe I should take a step back. Maybe I should focus on improving technique. With this sort of approach that you've taken of taking a step back to then take two forward, have you seen objectively better improvements in muscle mass and strength?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt. And the people who are the ones I trust the most, to be honest with me, are the ones who will say, yeah, look, your legs are getting bigger, your chest is getting bigger. But yeah, the other thing is I notice in the way that my clothes fit as
Mm.
well. Because my gym shorts are a little bit tighter in the thigh, which is where I want them to be tighter.
Yeah.
And my shirts are a little bit tighter in the chest, which is also what I'm looking for. So, from an objective perspective, the measurements would tell you that I've gained size. My wife would tell you like, oh, he's looking a little bit fuller in the chest, but then my clothes also tell that story as
Yeah.
well. So objectively, I have seen the results that I was hoping for.
Yeah. That's great. And people listening aren't looking at your progress images, but dude, you look amazing.
Thank-
Yeah, seriously. Let me ask you this last question about training. You mentioned earlier that you felt like you couldn't really get much more out of training. Why did you feel that?
I felt like back to this concept of adding weight every week and that you needed that to build muscle. Like I was at the point where, if I was doing a leg press or a squat, like couldn't really add that much more.
Yeah.
So I felt like, yeah, I wasn't able to push through. And then I thought that, because I equated adding weight with gains, what is a third party coach going to be able to add to my process? Because I'm already training with intensity. I'm already nearing the maximum amount of weight that maybe genetically I could live. And so what I realized in adopting it or having a trainer or a coach, Bernardo, was, you know, it's there are multiple parameters to your training. It's not just intensity. It's not just the amount of weight you lift. It's not just mindset. It's kind of all of those things combined together. But the combination of those things in a methodical program that's goal orientated
Mhm.
is is really the key. And that's what really helped me the most with my training is organizing it around a long-term objective with interim steps. And for me, like I always had a long-term objective, which was to gain size. And so every day I'd go in with a lot of intensity, but yeah, I didn't allow my body to rest. I just kind of trained until I broke. And then, yeah, I'd have to take a week out of the gym or take a couple of days off. And so, yeah, I would go forward and then step back, but not in the way that we were just talking about, in a way that was detrimental to my training, not in a way that was creative to my long-term
Yeah.
training.
Yeah. The key concept there is like doing things in a methodical way,
Yeah.
right? Because I feel like people also confuse how muscle actually grows and adapts. It's like the training itself is what's making muscle grow, and that's not true. It's the recovery that makes muscle grow, right? Training is just a stimulus, and I think, and it's just not muscle growth, it's also improvements in muscular strength, which goes hand in hand with growth, right? But I think it's a pretty obvious concept to grasp when we talk about it acutely. For example, most people would know that if you max out on your bench or your squat today and you try to do it again tomorrow, your max tomorrow will be less than what it was today. Why? Because you just haven't had enough time to recover, right? But now we think about recovery, we tend to think about recovery in an acute sense, like, hey, 48 hours, 72 hours, I'm good to train again. And partially true, but fatigue also accumulates over weeks, over months, right? And if we're chronically under recovered, even slightly, we're not going to be progressing optimally, right? And we know that things like performance is probably the most important variable to actually progress,
Mm.
right? But it's performance relative to what your body's actually capable of. What do I mean by this? Let's say your max squat for like, let's say 10 reps might be like 225, throwing out a random number, right? And in order to see progress in muscular growth, you probably want to be training with that 225 anywhere between 7 reps up to like 9 reps, right? That optimal zone of like 1 to 3 RIR. But now let's say you're chronically slightly fatigued, even by like 10%. And now what you could actually do is maybe 205 or 215. And you're doing that for 7, 8, 9 reps, maybe 10 reps. You're pushing it hard all the time, all the time, all the time. You're never recovering. So you're never really performing at your capacity, which is at 225 for 8 or 9. So you're never really actually stimulating muscle growth to the degree that you could if you simply like took a step back and trained a little bit easier and then built up the intensity. What people don't understand is that not only does intensity accumulate, it lingers, right? So the reason why we do the peak week at week 7 or week 8 and then take a deload is because that deload allows you to dissipate the fatigue from the week before. And then you slowly ramp up until something that's really difficult again,
Mhm.
right? And then when you give yourself that 6 to 8 week block, you can definitely hit PRs in that time frame. And some people need a little bit longer, some people need a little bit less, but the theory stands. So I'm just happy to hear that you actually followed the process and have seen the results, because a lot of people are really hard headed too and like don't actually want to take a step back.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I would just add to what you were saying too is that methodical process allows for at least me to embrace the intensity around training for a
Yes.
7 week period, because I know I'm going to build throughout that time. And so I'm comfortable going in and giving the effort that I need to give throughout that time frame. And look, sometimes we'll push the meso out a week if I'm feeling really good. And in certain cases, we dialed it back a week where we've said,
Hmm.
hey, we're going to try to get to week 7, but I'm really feeling the fatigue, and
Yep.
so we're dialing it back a week. But mentally, for me, it allows me to keep pushing hard because I know that I am accumulating that fatigue, and I'm going to get a break at some point. Whereas in my past life, I was just going in and pushing, 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 pushing until I did break, and then
Yeah.
either mentally or physically, and then you got to take a step back, and then you're starting back over again. And and the difference is there's no method. So you're pushing a lot, but you're not getting the gains that you want.
Yeah, completely. Um, yeah, that's great, man. A lot of really key lessons here when it comes to the training side of things. I'd love to shift the conversation to talk a little bit about nutrition, because you're experiencing some unique difficulties there as well, right? And Bernardo had mentioned that you had a very like all or nothing mindset when it comes to nutrition, because you tend to have uh, perfectionist kind of tendencies when it came to food. You also travel a lot for work, and I know one of the things that you mentioned, even in the video that you had done for us some time back, was that it was difficult for you really know how to have flexibility with your diet when you were traveling while still being able to participate with some outings, right? Because part of your work is going out to eat quite frequently, knowing what sorts of foods to choose and all of that. So, what were some of your biggest challenges when it came to nutrition that were preventing you from seeing the progress that you wanted to see?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge was consistency.
Yeah.
And so I was one of the people that I was really good during the week, when I wasn't traveling in particular, because I had a lot of control over my diet. Yeah, I would bring my breakfast, I'd bring my lunch. I knew what I was going to eat for dinner. Everything was totally fine. But anytime I deviated from that, it was
Hmm.
very difficult for me to control my diet. So if I went to a work dinner, and there was wine and steaks, and I had the mentality of, what, like, I'll have a glass of wine and a steak, and we'll just start over again tomorrow on the diet side. And or I get to the weekend and allow myself a little bit of a wider band on what I eat. and incorporating some unhealthy foods in that as well. And so, yeah, there was a lot of consistency during the week when I wasn't traveling, and a lot less consistency on the weekend. And then the other thing, and we didn't talk about this at the beginning, but my entire family's in Houston. My wife's entire family is in Houston. So we get together with family once or twice on the weekends, and we're always celebrating that togetherness with
Yeah.
food. And there's always plentiful food. And I have always struggled in situations where there's copious amounts of food and no one to really look over or control the quantity of food that I was taking in. And so, yeah, those were situations in which I really struggled, and they were always counterproductive to the goals that I hope to achieve on the diet side. So, I felt like, man, I've had good trainings all week, and then I get to the weekend and like, well, I've had good trainings, and we're with the family, and yeah, that we're grilling hamburgers or we're doing steaks or whatever, and yeah, okay, well, just gonna enjoy this event and we'll start again tomorrow. And I just had that mentality, and it was really destructive to what I was trying to accomplish. And frankly, the amount of effort I was putting in the gym.
Yeah, those are some really good points that I think are very common struggles in the sense of being very consistent throughout the week and then inconsistent on the weekends. And sometimes people see it. My buddy asked me about this and he was like, dude, if I eat pretty healthy for 5 or 6 days and I'm on point with my diet, is it okay to just eat whatever I want 1 or 2 days out of the week? And it's because they're comparing 1 or 2 days to 5 or 6 days, right? It's like, well, this one significantly outweighs this, but you could undo all the work of those 5 and 6 days in just 1 or 2 days, depending on the quantity of food consumed, right? At least what I've noticed, AJ, is that these sorts of behaviors stem from this mindset or idea that you have to be overly restrictive with your diet if you're trying to be in shape, and you have to be very clean with your nutrition. And for some people, that's sustainable. For most people, that's not sustainable. And so when you're put in a position where you're tempted with more food, since you typically try to restrict a ton, it's hard to have more restriction in those situations. So you kind of say, F it, and just eat as much as you possibly can. And then you're back at square one on Monday, right? Would you say that parallels your experience?
That's absolutely my experience. Yeah.
Let me ask you this: why did you feel like you had to be really restrictive with your diet?
Just to maintain my health goals, because it was, as you mentioned, I'm numbers orientated and was always logging things in my fitness pal and, looking at the calories and everything and counting them in my head versus what I had expended in training. And, so it's like, okay, chicken breasts, I have 200 grams, 225 calories. And then if I've got, a cup of white rice, 300 calories. And I go through the day and I'm adding up what I'm going to eat. And that's 2,200 calories. And that was the goal. And so I was like, okay, well, there's no flexibility in here for a piece of fruit or, a glass of wine or, just whatever it was, like a square of chocolate at night. Because I can only eat these things. So I have to have this amount of calories. And if I don't eat that exact number, the whole thing is going to come off the rails. And then the intensity of that kind of mathematics throughout the week, just my mind was worn out by the weekend.
Yeah.
And then the key difference is also, besides just the mental fatigue of staying so locked in and eating chicken all the time, was that on the weekends I had a lot more access to food, because during the week I'm at work, I'm busy, I don't have as much access. And then on the weekends, I'm generally home with the kids, and we're having lunch at home and finish lunch, and there's still food in the refrigerator, so
Yeah.
and you're I became less inclined to pay attention to the hunger cues and was just eating more for the satisfaction of eating. As well. So I think the combination of mental fatigue and food availability was a very destructive combination for my diet.
Yeah.
And and that was to your question on why did I feel like I have to eat that way? Well, because there was a blow up on the week, and then I got to the week, I was like, okay, gotta focus, gotta got to make sure I hit the numbers, right? Because I blew it up Saturday, Sundays, and now I got to get back on.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great points. And I like that you brought up the concept of food availability. And I'll also add to that, I don't know if it's so much just food availability, because I'm sure if you wanted something throughout the week, you could have access to it in theory, right? I think what it comes down to as well, AJ, is the importance of structure when it comes to diet, right? Because for most of us, our weeks are pretty structured. We have a work schedule, we eat at certain times, we prepare stuff during certain times. A lot of people don't have that structure during the week, and that's when sometimes people really struggle with health from a body fat perspective because they have no structure at all. But I think most of us have some structure during the week, and then we don't have any structure during the weekend. It's like, well, how do I do this during the weekend? Now there's more food available. I don't have structure. It's difficult. Let me ask you this. How has your approach to nutrition changed over time?
Yeah. So the biggest, most impactful thing that Bernardo helped me with was the default diet. And so that helped me move away from this concept of I can only eat chicken and rice and broccoli during the week. And yeah, there are there are macronutrients that I need to consume at several meals throughout the day. And what does that look like for me? So what does that look like for me? I train 5 a.m. So before I train, have a protein shake just to get the metabolism started. And then afterwards, I'll have a breakfast with it's a little bit more carby, but still some protein in it. And the benefit of thinking about the breakfast that way was because before I was like, okay, I can have 6 egg whites and a half a cup of oatmeal. That was my breakfast. And that's great when I'm at home. But then when I travel and I don't have access to egg whites and oatmeal, um, then I didn't know what to do. So it's like, okay, well, I guess I'll just have toast or whatever. And now in my mind, okay, well, I need to have the carbohydrate about this amount, so protein about this amount. So I can do some Greek yogurt and berries, or, and I can mix in some nuts for my fat. And it just gave me some more flexibility around the foods that I could consume at different meals. And then, I had the same concept at lunch where I had a smaller portion of carbohydrates, a little bit more protein, and then the same concept at dinner. And that was the way that I staged my meals throughout the day. And what that allowed me to do was also take that into the weekend. And so to your point on lack of structure, where that default diet now gave me structure because I I knew that hey, here's what my morning looks like, my morning meals look like, here's what my evening meals look like, here's what my evening meals look like. And if we're going out with friends, that meal still looks like that, right? But that hasn't changed. It's just I have more degrees of freedom with the foods that I can choose when I go out. And then I also know going into that event, okay, well, because I'm going out, there's probably going to be a little bit more fat in the meal. So I need to dial that back in the earlier parts of the day. But I can do that because that's within the context of the default diet. So that was really the major evolution is allowing for the degrees of freedom around food choices because I had the default macronutrient construction of each meal throughout the day, which also marry with the amount of calories that I wanted to consume during the day to maintain the physique and also maintain the training intensity. Because the other thing that was really important for me was partnering those two things together because before like I had the training side, I didn't have the nutrition side or kind of vice versa. And now, when we were talking about goals earlier, Bernardo was able to say, okay, look, you want to build some size. So we need to be at a little bit of a caloric excess. That looks like for you, 2,400 to 2,600 calories a day. Here's what that looks like in the context of the default diet. And then that really helped me add structure to my life that I didn't have before on the diet side. So that was a really powerful evolution. And then the other evolution was around habits. And I would say that I had some bad habits around my diet. And one of those was, coming home and from work, long day, very tired, hungry because I hadn't had anything to eat since lunch. And, I'd start kind of scavenging whatever was around. And I was probably adding like 200-300 calories to my diet by doing that.
Yeah.
And so when we created this default diet, we knew about that habit. And one of the things Bernardo said was, at about 5 o'clock, what I want you to do is have a really like healthy, fibrous snack. Not healthy in terms of food, definitely in terms of food quality, but like a good portion of a healthy snack. And then when you go home, let's see if you still feel the same way. It, and I noticed that I didn't, because I had prepared myself
Yeah.
for that situation. And so, that helped a lot. And I was able to eat smaller dinners. And then the third component of this was paying attention to hunger cues, because that's one thing that I was really bad at doing. And I didn't even, I didn't even have any cognizance of it, to be honest with you. Like I was saying, I get to the weekend and just eating to eat.
Yeah.
And, Bernardo really helped me say, you know what, bring some cognizance to your meal, like you do to your trainings.
Yeah.
When you sit down, just moderate your food intake. You don't have to chew your feet 100 times before you swallow, but just, eat and then pay attention to how you're feeling. And when you start to feel, like a 5, a 6 on the scale, stop for a minute or two,
Yeah.
and then see if you want to eat some more. And that was a huge evolution for me, because before I was like, okay, let's get to dinner time, ravenously hungry, long day of work. But I'm still going to be disciplined because it's the week. Let's put the chicken and the rice and the broccoli. Okay, now I'm starving. Let me go get some more. Because I would eat that in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Um, it, and so by just taking that more methodical approach, slowing down just a little bit, paying attention to those, I was able to kind of complete the trifecta of the default diet, which allowed me to better understand what I needed to intake throughout the day without being so tied to the numbers.
Mm.
Then adjusting that default diet to kind of combat some of the bad habits I had at night. And then this last element was the cognizance around that diet, which really helped me, kind of stay within that zone of satiety that I needed to be in to accomplish my objective.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how such simple, because at the end of the day, it is relatively simple, right? But such simple behaviors make such a massive impact on not just your results, but your actual behaviors and yeah, behaviors around nutrition, right? And I think what's difficult, AJ, is for us to be aware of these things on our own, right? Because
Yeah.
we all do things habitually. We're not super aware of it. And I think that's one of the benefits of coaching. It's like having somebody have a different perspective on what you're doing and saying like, hey, maybe this one little thing, we can tweak it slightly, right? Who would have ever thought that actually eating a snack before getting home would help improve your overall dietary behaviors? And it's so common. So many people, myself included sometimes, pretty much have dinner before dinner, right? It's like you're in the kitchen, maybe you're cooking something up, heating something up, and you're snacking on a bunch of stuff.
Mhm.
And it's pretty mindless. You're typically snacking on stuff that doesn't make you feel satiated, anyways. Like for me, one of the most impactful behaviors for myself is simply eating meals when I'm hungry. And if I stick to that, and what I mean by that is just like not snacking much between meals. And if I feel hungry, I ask myself like, am I hungry enough to have a meal? Yes. Okay. Let's have a nice sized meal that'll make me feel satiated. If not, I'll wait till I'm hungry enough to have a meal. If I do that alone, it's pretty easy to stay in decent shape without focusing on any of the other stuff that takes that to the next level, because it just removes mindless eating, right? And like you said, it could add up to 200 or 300 calories before dinner, but if you do that before lunch and you do that between breakfast and lunch, like that's another 5, 6, 700 calories right there. I also wanted to touch on what you mentioned with the default diet, introducing some flexibility, right? Because even how we were talking about earlier when it comes to training, the marriage between volume and intensity as these two variables that you need to manage harmoniously, flexibility and structure, I think here is a synonymous word would be like restriction in some ways, right? There's a fine marriage there as well,
Mhm.
because we don't want to be so restrictive that it's unsustainable, because that's essentially what a very restricted diet does. It's unsustainable for most people. But we also don't want to be so flexible that there are no guardrails, right? So it's like, how do we put the guardrails in place where they need to be, but still allow for flexibility for us to enjoy our diet. And that's the biggest reason, AJ, why when it comes to nutrition, we coach a lot more from a behavioral standpoint too, of like, let's focus on these habits and let's implement this little strategy and that little strategy. One, because everybody's lifestyle is different. And two, because it does exactly that. It gives some guardrails of like, we're focusing on this behavior, but you could really fill that in with whatever sorts of foods you enjoy, which makes the whole process feel a little bit easier as well. So I'm happy that you've been able to, you articulated that so perfectly, by the way.
Thank you. Well,
Yeah,
I would say that I I really benefited from the training, but the diet was a massive evolution for me.
cool.
And that was the part where I, you know, training was great, but the diet was just
Yeah,
another level because I could not break out of the mentality and the habits that I formed. And those were the three things that Bernardo really helped me do. And then the final evolution in that piece of the puzzle that was really a major breakthrough was, and you mentioned this when you talked about behavioral coaching, because he on one of the check-ins, he was like, every week you write in the check-in that, like on a Thursday night or a Saturday night, whatever it is, like you went off your diet. Because it's okay. We need to build some flexibility in that, and I understand that can happen. Um, but it seems to be that happens in times where you're out eating with friends or you're at a family thing. And he said, I think that you framed yourself as the person who overeats at these events. Like, and that's when you throw your diet out the window. And he's like, you need to reframe yourself as the healthy person that you want to be and the person that has implemented the default diet and is still maintained that flexibility that has that structure at those events. So those are not the celebratory events for you just to eat whatever you want. They're opportunities for you to nourish yourself for your next training. And so start to frame yourself that way. And let's see what happened. And so for the next couple of weeks after that, yeah, I have those events every week because of family get-togethers and whatnot. And so I would go into those prepared to say, like, hey, this is the default diet that I need to have this meal, and I'm not going to eat extra just because it's around, or
hmm
I'm the guy who pushes this diet to the side in these events. I'm the guy who sticks to his diet in these events, and I reframed it that way, and that has also been a major evolution in my diet. And so I bring that up because your point on behavioral coaching resonated with me so strongly, because that came after working with Bernardo for, nearly a year and him going back through going through all my checklists
Yeah.
and then realizing that, hey, we've been building in this direction and we're almost there. But here's what I see in what you're telling me, and here's how we can change it so that you can really optimize what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. And it's funny the way psychology works, right? Because when you tell yourself you can't have a food, you almost want it more. Versus when you truly are able to develop the mindset of, I'm actually choosing not to eat that food, it almost like the outcome is the same, but develops a sense of ownership, and doesn't necessarily make you feel as bad about not having a particular food, right? Because I'm being mindful and intentional and conscious about not eating this because I'm trying to stick to this goal, and this goal is important to me because of X, Y, Z. And it kind of just solidifies everything that you're doing
Mhm.
and makes it easier to choose to eat or not to eat certain things, right? Um, AJ, before we start to wrap up, and I want to be respectful of your time, so if I go over, just let me know. But I wanted to ask this one big question because we've been like in the weeds talking about nutrition and training. But if we zoom out, you mentioned earlier at the beginning of the episode that you work about 50 hours a week. You're very career driven. You're married, you have 3 kids, you're very family oriented. Um, Time is something that people really struggle with. And I think part of it is lack of structure, but oftentimes people blame the fact that they have a busy career, the fact that they have kids, as the reason why they can't prioritize their health and fitness, right? So, realistically, how do you manage this with a full time, well, more than a full time job and focusing on your family as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, it comes down to really having a strong partnership or understanding with my wife. So I get up early and go to the gym, and that's my time. And part of the reason why that's my time is because I need to be at work early. And a lot of times I take the kids to school and then come in to work early, but I have to get the gym done before that because all of the family stuff happens in the evening. And so I know that I need to get up early and get it done or it's not going to happen. So there is structure involved there. But yeah, I've talked to my wife and we've had a conversation around, that being my time during the day. And as long as I get up and get it done, she's totally fine with that. And I'm available, in the evening to help with the kids. And, that's her time. So when I get
Yeah.
home, that's her time to go and do her workout. And it works for us because I'm a morning person and she's a night owl, and that's and so that's a great it ends up being a great partnership. But it was really having that conversation around finding time for us both to fit in and prioritize our fitness for ourselves and for our kids. Because, if we're not fit, we can't enjoy being with them as much as we otherwise would have been. And so, it was about having that time and in that agreement on when we would do what that works for both of our schedules. And then being just committed and rigorous about getting it getting it done and sticking to it. And what I found is it's always hard to get up in the morning, but once you've established that pattern of doing it, now it's actually harder for me not to get up.
Yeah.
Because I do naturally wake up and then I'm a little bit tired today. I'm not going to go. Yeah, for 5-10 minutes, I lay awake and I'm like, oh, I really want to go.
And I'm assuming, AJ, that you probably go to sleep at a pretty good time at night as well, right?
I do. Yeah, I'm in bed at about 9:30.
Yeah. I bring these points up because, I mean, I love that the first thing you said is like having open communication and structure with your wife, right? Because, um, I mean, that's the number one most important thing. If you live with someone else, you're married, you have kids, like being on the same page about these things and having the same priorities. And I think that's honestly where a lot of struggles for some people do stem, where they don't have that open communication. Maybe they don't see eye to eye. Maybe they don't have the time, or their partner doesn't have the same priorities that they do, and it makes things a little bit more difficult, right? But I also asked the question of like, when do you go to sleep? Because like you can't have it all either,
No.
right?
Yeah.
Like you can't have a super successful career, a good marriage, prioritize your kids, go to the gym, and also party with your friends till 10 or 11 p.m. Like go out to the bar and have some drinks, right? Like, would it be fun to be able to do that? Yeah, we're not lying. Like it would be fun to be able to do that, but I think sacrifices are, um, I mean, sacrifices are necessary, and it's important to understand what sorts of sacrifices you have to make for some of these things as well, right?
Yeah, I do think that's a great point. And without understanding that prioritization and structure, it is really hard to achieve your objective because we were talking about that training intensity earlier. And even on the diet side, if you're constantly mentally fatigued, something's going to break. And so you do have to get to sleep. You do have to put in the effort into your training and diet, but is so long as you can find that balance and structure. I mean, that's the key. And I do think it comes with having, for me as been married, it comes with having a conversation around prioritization and what's important and really what you're willing to give. Because as a tangible example of that, I told Bernardo, really want to build my leg. It's like, okay, do you think you could do 6 days in a mezzo instead of 5 or 6 days instead of 5? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. No problem.
Yeah.
And so I got about 5 weeks in and my wife was like, this is just on the Saturday, like we have talked about it. That was my day to sleep in. Now you're going to the gym in the mornings. And I was like, okay, I've only got 2 more weeks left. So let's finish this. And I promise I'll go back to 5.
Yeah.
And so to your point, like you do have to, even though I may want to put more effort into the training, I did have to back off in that case so that I could keep, keep my other priorities in line.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just, I mean, priorities are super important. Boundaries are really important too, right? Because sometimes people prioritize and then don't stick to the priorities because they don't set the appropriate boundaries around those priorities. And I'm bringing this up because I had a, a memory came into mind with a client that I used to work with probably, I don't know, about 3 years ago now, where he really did prioritize his health and fitness. Like it was really important to him, but he would let his work break those boundaries essentially, right? So naturally, he was very much a people pleaser. He probably worked 50, 60 hours a week. And then if anybody asked him for anything, he had a pretty high up position in his company. He would drop everything and prioritize that. The downside is that, like, not that that's a wrong behavior. It's like he didn't want to be that way. Every time that happened, he felt really bad. He would be stressed. Then he would be anxious. He wouldn't show up the same way with his family. He would feel bad that he couldn't get his workouts in. And like he had a really hard time communicating that with his coworkers. And I'm like, dude, your issue is not the priority part. It is setting boundaries around these things. So we even worked on like, because he was nervous to have this conversation around like, how do we approach this conversation in a healthy way? And how do we frame it from the perspective of like, hey, if I set these boundaries and you're not allowed to touch this time because this is my workout time, I'm actually going to show up as a better person at work. I'm going to show up as a better person when it comes to family time. Like, it's funny because like life obviously plays a big role into our health and fitness when we aren't just health and fitness professionals, and that's all. I mean, kind of hypocritical for me to say that because I partially am, but most people can relate to that, right? And the sacrifices part is important too. I think I've told this story probably a number of times on the podcast, but I had a client who was in a very similar position to you, AJ, where he was in really good shape. He was super healthy. And his goal was to have like a super defined six pack. And he already had like visible abs, right? And he probably needed to lose another 5 or 10 pounds of body fat to get to where he wanted to get to. But he enjoyed going out with his daughter once or twice for dinner every week and not really worrying about it and grabbing some ice cream. He enjoyed having a date night with his wife. So he had all these behaviors that were inherently preventing him from getting there. And we had this conversation around like, hey man, like if you really want that goal, you have to give these things up. Do you really want to give these things up? Are these things like, what's more important, the six pack or these things? And he's like, no, I definitely don't want to give up date nights with my wife. I definitely don't want to give up going out to dinner with my daughter. And I was like, then maybe this just isn't the right goal. And it helped him really reframe what his goals were, what his priorities were, and removes a ton of stress as well. Anyways, AJ, I appreciate your time a ton. I want to close out this episode, one, by giving you an opportunity to share anything else you want to share. And two, I'd love for you to brag about yourself for a second and just tell us, in the time that you've been working with Bernardo, what have been some of the coolest results that you've experienced, physically, non-physical, and what are some things that you've achieved that maybe you thought weren't achievable at all?
Yeah. And so the first thing I would say is for anyone that would be considering or even thinking about this, just try it. And just try it per mezzo. Because, I think when I was making the decision around whether or not to originally partner with Bernardo, I had this mental block that it was something that was like forever or not. I do get into this a lot where, if I'm going to make a change or try to evolve something, I get locked in this idea that it's something that I have to do forever. And that really prevents me from trialing anything at all. And so if you have that mentality, I would just give it a try, because I think that, if anything that we've talked about resonates with anyone, I really have found a lot of value in the program for myself, both on the diet and exercise side. And I've also learned how to push myself harder in the gym, but in a smarter way. I've learned how to incorporate the diet around that. And I've learned a lot about myself and my habits. And, you mentioned your client and his goal around the six pack. Bernardo and I have had similar conversations about, is that really your goal? Or is your lifestyle consistent with that goal that you want to have, or is there really something else that you're trying to achieve? And that's not a conversation that's easy to have with yourself. So I've just done a lot of value in the program from multiple perspectives in ways that I didn't think that I would have originally. And then, in terms of myself in the results, it's hard to do, because I really like to give a lot of credit to the program and to Bernardo. But, I'd say I had three major goals on the gym side going in, and it was to build size in my arms, in my legs, and in my back. And those were areas where I felt that, when I just when I looked at myself in the mirror and I was wearing t-shirts, where I just kind of wasn't quite happy with. And so, over my course of time working with him, I've put on about 8 pounds of muscle, and I feel like my arms are looking much better. And like I was mentioning on my legs, like I put my gym shorts on, they're a little bit tight in the thighs, which I really like. So
Yeah.
I realize there's a certain amount of vanity for that, but I'm really happy with the work that we've done in the gym. But I would say that the most impactful thing for me is the empowerment on the diet side. And that has been, it's really been really mentally freeing, because my diet was it was a huge source of mental fatigue, and it was a huge anchor. And incorporating these changes that we've done over the last couple of years has really helped me. Like, I've, I've been able to move away from logging foods. I can kind of size things up during the day, and there's a lot of flexibility in my mind associated with that. So, the structure of the default diet is important, because it frees up my mind to go do other things that I need to do at work while still accomplishing my health objectives. I think that's, for me, has been one of the most major evolutions. And then the third thing I would say is just the partnership that I've developed with Bernardo, and his ability to get to know me and to know what my drivers are, and to be able to push me in all facets of my training, diet, and exercise, is really helping me on that side of myself. And I think that that's really unique.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing all those. And the last thing I'll ask succinctly is, because, when we talk about progress, we're like, I'm feeling a little bit bigger, shorts are tight on the thighs, and all that's great. But I think what people really want is like how that impacts their actual day-to-day life, right? So how has your progress so far positively impacted your life?
The direct answer to that is confidence.
Yeah.
Because I wear a suit, as you can see.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of muscle that you can see through a suit. But I feel like I know it for myself. And so I carry myself with a little bit of higher stature, with a little bit more confidence. Because, and it's not even just the way that I look, it's the performance in the gym that morning, because I knew that I put my full effort into that exercise or that training session or whatever. So I feel like accomplished the moment when I show up to the office. And then, because I know I've accomplished something, and because I know that there's a body of work behind that over the last couple of years, I carry myself differently. I comport myself differently, and with a lot more confidence. And I feel like that comes through in meetings and in communications with our clients, and all the different interactions I have with people throughout the day, in a way that, even though I am wearing a lot of clothes, if I was more body conscious, that wouldn't.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's been a major evolution for me.
Yeah, definitely. I was anticipating you going towards the concept of feeling more confident, because I feel like that's the typical answer that most people give, because it's true, man. Like, it's not just about the way you look, but seeing yourself perform a certain way, get stronger, build confidence with the things that you're doing in the gym, definitely builds confidence outside the gym as well. So I'm happy that you've experienced those wins. AJ, thank you so much for giving us some of your time and sharing your experience. Is there any final things you want to share?
No, that was awesome conversation. I really appreciate you making the time to chat with me.
Yeah. Appreciate it, brother. And I hope you have a wonderful anniversary tomorrow as well.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Take care.